I'm Denise, and I'm a compulsive eater, anorexic, bulimic, and I weigh and measure only 3 meals per day, only from foods listed on the gray sheet without exception, and I commit them to my sponsor verbally in person on a daily basis, and I eat those meals no matter what, and my abstinence date is 27 February 2001. And I was 12-stepped into Gray Sheet on August 1st, 1997. We used to nickname this gal Southern Sandra in Los Angeles. And I had been in the rooms of OA and OA How for 14 years. A psychiatrist 12-stepped me into OA. He said I had a disease that he couldn't cure. And I just used the F word at him. And I said, I'm not paying you $125 a session, seeing you 3 times a week for you telling me you can't cure me. And I didn't have a problem. But when I started going to him, maybe I was about 25 pounds overweight, but I was going to him for anxiety attacks, driving the freeways in Los Angeles. And he said to me on our first visit, he said, you know, you could probably stand to lose a few pounds. And he was this tall, thin guy. Well, that set me off. That set me into the anorexic end of this disease and the bulimia, exercise bulimia. And so, you know, I did go to OA kicking and screaming. The only thing that I liked in OA was they were thin anorexics. For some reason I stayed, and they got rid of the eating plans when I came in. And they said, you know, you do your own abstinence. And to me, that's like telling an alcoholic, well, you can drink straight gin, but don't drink the other stuff, just straight gin. And that, you know, telling an alcoholic to create their own sobriety. And so I stayed in How, and I kept relapsing every 6 months because I didn't have the solution to taking step 1. I didn't know I had an allergy. That was number 1. And number 2, I never knew when enough was enough. When you told me I didn't have to weigh and measure my food if I was at a restaurant in somebody's house, that's when the undereating started, because I would share my food with somebody. You couldn't tell me to go to a restaurant and the size of my fist was the size of a protein. That just didn't work. So when I came into Gray Sheet in Los Angeles, and there were 2 live meetings a week, and I got a sponsor, and he told me what to do, gave me the Gray Sheet and everything, and I started weighing and measuring my food. And after 2 weeks, I told him, I said, oh, somebody at work, and I was a certified nurse anesthetist, so I was working in the OR. I said, oh, somebody saw my lunch and they said it looked so beautiful. So I gave him a little taste, and he said, you're back to day 1. I said, why? He said, because you didn't eat everything you told me you were going to eat. He said, you didn't even make an outreach call to me. And at that time, we had no cell phones, so you had to carry rolls of dimes and quarters in your purse with plenty of phone numbers. And so he put me back to day 1, and I stayed with him because I had lost like 2 pounds in 2 weeks. And I lost all my weight. It was like 35 pounds at that time after 6 months. And I was also 12-stepped into AA at the exact same Saturday. We went to an AA meeting first and then Gray Sheet, because I started to drink when I was in a relapse with the food. And I went, this is my solution, the alcohol. That's what will get me quiet. And that little voice went off in my head, and it said, you just crossed the line, you're an alcoholic. And my self-reliance said, the only thing you have to do, Denise, is not drink. Well, I did that for a year, and I was ready to blow my head off and start drinking, not where I left off, to make up for lost time, because that's what my relapses were like in How. Each relapse got worse and worse and worse. And so I went and I continued to weigh and measure. And at 6 months, I wanted to start dating somebody in my AA group, and my Gray Sheet sponsor out of Cambridge, who had 25 years sobriety and abstinence. She said, I don't think that's a good idea, Denise. She said, weigh and measure your food, work on your program. And what she was talking about was doing the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, not just step 1, do all the steps. And I fired her, got a different sponsor, and wanted to keep dating. And it was my friend in AA, Barbara, who passed away from breast cancer. She said, you better be honest with Tom, Denise. She said, he's not interested in you in the extent you think he is. And she said, you're going to drink if you don't get honest with him. And I said, okay, Barbara, I'll tell him. And I told him, he said, Denise, I just like having coffee with you. Well, I didn't
10
know how to
minutes
handle
left, Denise, 10 left.
10. Okay. I didn't know how to handle rejection or not being good enough. And so I said, oh, that's okay. And 1 month after my first year, I know how to deal with the resentment and the self-loathing. And I willfully picked up in a 7-Eleven with the idea that I will get back on tomorrow. That relapse took me 2.5 years to get back to gray sheet abstinence. I left LA because I was in so much shame. I moved to Charleston, where nobody knew me except my sister. And I took a job, doing nurse anesthesia. And somebody told me about the phone bridge that was starting up or was going on in 1999. And I started going to that. And there was a gray sheeter who said, call me. I said, but I can't stop eating. She said, just call me, keep calling me. And that's what I did. And 2.5 years, I got a sponsor. I started weighing and measuring my food. And after 2 weeks, because I hadn't lost 65 pounds that I had gained, I picked up on a Sunday when I was on call and I had the worst reaction to the food. And I had to call my boss and say, I have stomach virus, and I was throwing up, had the dry heaves, everything. And she said, I'll take over your call. And when I called my gray sheet sponsor the next morning, I told her I couldn't give her my food because my stomach was like glass. And she said, if you're not going to give me your food, are you going to eat what I tell you to eat? And I said, yes, I will. She told me exactly what to eat. And I weighed and measured that. And that's when my journey started. And, I was fortunate enough to go to a gray sheet retreat, and there was an old timer there. And this had to be over 20 years ago. And I think I had about 6 months of abstinence. And she sat across the table in Austin, Texas. And she said, gray sheet didn't promise me that I wouldn't have to take blood pressure medicine when I reached 65. That was the only thing I remembered out of that retreat. And what she was telling me was life was going to continue on life's terms, but I was going to be able to stay abstinent if I really wanted this abstinence. And I came home, and then we had 9/11. And then and I flew up to Boston to see my sponsor like a month after 9/11. I was scared shitless, but I wanted to go see her in Boston and go to meetings. And then I went out to the Kansas City group a month later after that. And then the no matter what started happening. I got severe vertigo, barely a year abstinence, and I was dizzy and nauseous 24/7. And my sponsor told me exactly what to eat because I could barely stand up straight. And they gave me a diagnosis that wasn't going to get any better. And she said, just weigh and measure your food. And the vertigo kind of decreased a little bit. I was able to go back to work. And then things settled down. And then I, went on, and then there was some emergency surgery, but you always told me to keep my phone numbers and the dimes and quarters, and also a prepaid phone card. Because when I was in the emergency room, I called the gray sheeter in Boston, and I said, I can't eat my dinner because I got to go to the OR. The doctors are afraid I'll throw up and aspirate and get pneumonia. So I got to turn my dinner over. And this was like 8 o'clock at night. And I had called her up 2 hours before saying, I'm nauseous and everything, and the doctors want me on clear liquid. She said, okay, weigh and measure clear liquids. And then calling her back up again and said, can't do those. I said, I'm going to the OR. And she said, call me in the morning, which I did. And I called her when I woke up, and I said, they brought me a Southern breakfast. And she said, you tell the nurses you need 2 cluck clucks and an apple or whatever. And I said, okay. And when my surgeon came around, I was walking around and I said, I need to get discharged. I need to get out of here. And so then things settled down again. And, I did some traveling, and no matter what started coming up. I had spine surgery in 2013. That wasn't supposed to be complicated. And they accidentally perforated my colon and didn't realize that for 3 days. And when they did, they suspected something was wrong because I wasn't hungry for 3 days after the surgery. And I had brought my food to the hospital with me. And when they realized what had happened, they said, you're going to the OR and you may wind up with a colostomy for 8 weeks, whatever. I said, okay. Called my sponsor again and said, I can't eat my breakfast. They're going to take me to the OR. She said, okay, you turned over the meal. Call me when you wake up. Well, they took me to the operating room at 9 o'clock in the morning. I didn't wake up till midnight in ICU. And I was hysterical. And the nurse was so kind. She said, calm down, calm down. And she said, you're going to be okay. And so for the next 6 weeks, I weighed and measured my food.
Five
the only-
left, Denise, 5 left.
The only thing I could eat initially was the protein and the fruit at breakfast. I could eat the protein at lunch, but barely get the vegetables down. And my sponsor switched me from weighing everything to cupping. And then she said, try to eat some of the sawdust. She said, that'll cut down on volume also. If you can't finish it, call me. And that's what I had to do for 6 weeks. It took me 6 weeks to get back to my normal level. And so, I learned to retire in abstinence. I go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've done the steps with the Little Red Book, with the Back to Basics, with the Joe and Charlie. The latest thing I've done is the Big Book Step Study out of Hyannis, Massachusetts. And I've been doing that for over a year. And I have a step study sponsor, and I meet with her every Monday on her Zoom account. She's up in New York City. The latest, no matter what, was January, an abnormal mammogram. And when they did the biopsy, they said you have precancerous lesions. And I was stationed in Vietnam in 1970 to 71. And I was in an Agent Orange area. And my roommate overseas, she's from Illinois in a little farm community. She developed breast cancer a year ago, actual breast cancer. So I told my surgeon when I went, she said, we can just do a biopsy. I said, no. I said, we're going to go with bilateral mastectomies. And I said, I don't want to have to worry about mammograms every 6 months to see if this has changed. And so I had that. I took my food with me to the hospital. I told the anesthesiologist not to give me these certain drugs because it messes with my head, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. And he said, okay. He said, well, we'll give you just a little bit of Valium. I said, no. I said, you do not give me Valium or the other things. I said, I've got to have a clear head when the anesthesia wears off. He said, okay. And so when the surgeon called me up the next day when I was home, she said, you made a good decision. She said, not only did you have the precancerous stuff in the right breast, you had it throughout the left, and it never showed up on the mammogram on the left. So, I was taught to be grateful in this program, even with the no matter what's, when things weren't going my way. And I was taught that by my old house sponsor, because she said, you don't know how to be grateful, Denise, and I'm going to tell you how to be grateful. And you're going to write down 5 things, and you're going to repeat those to me until you can come up with your own list. And that's what I did until I could come up with my own list. So what I do in the morning, I say the acceptance prayer, the trust prayer, the fear prayer. And then I have other little readings. And as we say in my Big Book Step Study group, I try to live in steps 10, 11, and 12, making amends on a daily basis as they come up, and try to be of service to other people. So thanks for letting me share, and I pass.